Exorcisms, Echoes of the Profane. Introduction. Darkness has a voice. When one hears the word exorcism, one immediately imagines a scene taken from a film, a darkened room, a priest in cassock holding a trembling crucifix, a guttural voice that should not belong to any human being. But what cinema rarely shows, and few dare to honestly document, is the stark reality behind the ritual. This book is not a novel. Nor is it a collection of carefully crafted fictions for entertainment. What you will read below is based on real events, narratives from church archives, eyewitness testimony, and documents that for decades were kept hidden for reasons you may understand at the end of this work. Throughout the centuries, exorcism has been a practice surrounded by mystery, controversy, and fear. It is not simply a religious ritual, but a war between two worlds, the visible and the invisible. In every exorcism there is a victim, but also a message, a warning. This book explores not only the cases themselves, but the invisible consequences of the people who were present in them, the priests, the families, the doctors, and even the chroniclers. For more than 20 years I have studied documented cases of exorcism. I have traveled to lost villages in the Balkans, colonial ruins in South America, and abandoned convents in Sicily. In all these places, there is a constant, the undeniable presence of evil. And no, it is not mental illness, collective hysteria, or suggestion. Although some cases can be explained from psychiatry, there are others that defy all logic. How do you explain that an illiterate girl recites apocryphal verses in fluent Latin from a book she should not know? How do you process the testimony of a skeptic who ended up with a face torn by an invisible force while attending as an observer? This book is, in part, a warning. It is not recommended for easily suggestible people or for those seeking entertainment without consequences. Each story presented here has an echo, and this echo, like the demons it invokes, can find resonance in whoever reads it with an open heart and a closed mind. Exorcism is not a spectacle, Father Montenegro, one of the few official exorcists still active, once told me when I interviewed him in 2007. It's a battlefield, and every battle leaves dead. Some visible. Others, not so much. I have changed some names out of respect for the survivors and the families involved. However, everything narrated has been contrasted with multiple sources. What you're about to read isn't a story. It is a scar written in black ink, drawn from the living flesh of those who lived through these horrors. Exorcisms, Echoes of the Profane is an invitation to look beyond the veil. To understand that evil does not always manifest itself with horns or fire. Sometimes it appears in the form of a whisper, an absent look, a childish laugh at midnight in an empty room. Warning, you will not emerge unscathed. Chapter 1, The Open Door. The first sign was not a shout. It was a silence. The Del Valle family lived in a rural area of Querétaro, Mexico, in a simple but solid adobe house. María Del Valle was a young woman of 16, a committed and deeply Catholic student. Her mother, Estela, described her as a quiet girl, afraid of even killing an ant. But everything changed on February 14, 2004, after a night that no one in the family could fully explain. That morning, Maria was found sitting on the kitchen floor, staring into the darkest corner of the room. His face was motionless, his eyes glassy. Her younger brother, Daniel, was the first to see her. She thought she was sleepwalking, but when she tried to touch his shoulder, she turned her head slowly, almost mechanically, and said in a voice that was not hers. "You're not my brother," Daniel shouted. Estela ran down the stairs and found her daughter laughing in a low voice, her eyes closed, repeating a phrase in a language they did not understand. The father, Manuel Del Valle, tried to lift her, but Maria's body was unusually heavy, as if a force was keeping her anchored to the ground. That was the first night. In the following days, strange things began to happen. Dead animals appeared in the backyard without an apparent cause. Mary began to speak in languages she had never studied, Latin, Old German, something that seemed Aramaic. A local priest was called to bless the house, but upon entering, the man began to sweat copiously and left before completing the prayer. It was then that the family decided to contact the Archbishopric of San Juan del Rio. The church, cautious as always in these cases, first sent 2 clinical psychologists to rule out mental pathologies. Both professionals agreed on a provisional diagnosis of dissociative disorder, although they admitted that the symptoms did not fully fit any known picture. Mary did not react to medications, and her physical strength began to increase. On February 21st, he broke a wooden chair with his hands during an episode, shouting the name of a demon they could not pronounce. The case was referred to Father Esteban Montenegro, a priest with more than 30 years of experience in exorcism rituals. He did not hesitate. From the first moment he saw her, he knew it was not a psychiatric case. "The devil is patient," he said. "But when he finds an open door, he does not enter alone. He calls his brothers." During the preliminary inspection, Father Montenegro found something disturbing. Under Mary's bed, hidden under a loose board, there was a rudimentary Ouija board, made by hand. The family denied ever using it. No one knew how he got there. But the priest needed no more evidence. "The door is open," he murmured as he kept it in a linen bag. "Now we have to shut it down. If still possible." This chapter does not end with the solution. There is no immediate redemption and no light at the end of the tunnel. Only the beginning of a decline. Because when you open the door on the other side, you can't always close it again without paying a price. Do you want me to continue with Chapter 2, Symptoms of the Abyss? Chapter 2, Symptoms of the Abyss. Demons do not manifest immediately. They take their time. They filter through the cracks of the soul like water through the cracks of an ancient wall. At first, no one suspects. Then, when it is too late, the crack is an abyss. Father Esteban Montenegro used to say that the devil does not shout, he whispers. And that before the final roar, there are unequivocal signs for those who know how to watch. Experts in demonology recognize 3 stages in the process of possession: infestation, oppression, and finally, full possession. María Del Valle, at the time she was examined by the clergy, was already between oppression and possession. After the discovery of the Ouija board under his bed, his symptoms began to be accurately documented. The team accompanying Father Montenegro included a nurse, a theologian, and an assistant exorcist. For 3 days, they lived in the house of Los Del Valle, watching over Maria in 6-hour shifts, taking notes and recording. From this follow-up, signs emerged that coincide with numerous cases in the Vatican archive. Personality changes. Mary no longer responded to his name. At times, when her mother spoke to her, she called herself Namacil, a name that does not appear in any records of saints, but does appear in certain medieval grimoires of the 15th century, identifying a lesser entity of hell associated with child deception and corruption. Also, his behavior became erratic. From absolute calm, it could move into violent frenzy in a matter of seconds. He would pull out his hair, scratch his skin to the point of bleeding, and laugh while doing so, as if the pain was foreign to him. Xenoglossa. One of the most debated symptoms within contemporary theology is xenoglossa, the ability to speak unknown languages without having previously learned them. During one of the recordings, Mary recited Psalm 74 in Koine Greek. Father Montenegro, an expert in biblical languages, confirmed it. No one in the family knew Greek or had materials in that language. What was most disturbing was not his knowledge, but the tone with which he said it, mocking, parodic, as if he were reciting an insult disguised as a prayer. Religious aversions. A recurring phenomenon was the repulsion towards sacred objects. When they tried to place a crucifix in her room, Mary began to convulse. His body bowed unnaturally, as if his spine was breaking back. When a priest entered his room with holy water, it evaporated by touching his skin, leaving a blackish stain that smelled of rust and sulfur. The mirrors in the house also began to break by themselves. One by one, as if something avoided being seen through them. Superhuman strength. During one night of observation, the nurse, who had served in psychiatric emergencies for 15 years, tried to hold Mary with the help of the theologian when she began to scream. Maria, who weighed about 45 kilos, pushed them both with a force that threw them against the opposite wall. The scene was recorded on video. There was no medical or physical explanation for the phenomenon. Odors and environmental phenomena. The atmosphere of the house began to change. There was a constant smell of rotting meat. Temperatures fluctuated wildly for no apparent reason, from stifling heat to freezing cold in a matter of seconds. The light bulbs exploded. The animals in the neighborhood, particularly dogs and cats, stopped coming near the shelter. One of the nearest neighbors claimed to have seen Maria on the roof at 3:33 a.m. standing in the rain, talking to herself. When they asked the family, they said she had been locked in her room all night. The multiple voice. Perhaps one of the most disturbing elements was what exorcists call hellish polyphony, moments when the possessed person seems to speak with several voices at the same time. In a recorded session, while Father Montenegro prayed the Salve Regina, Mary responded with a laughter that did not seem human. Through the audio spectrogram, at least 3 distinct vocal patterns, male, low, and overlapping, were identified simultaneously emerging from her throat. Father Montenegro was not impressed. He had been facing these demonstrations for decades. But he acknowledged that he had rarely seen such intense symptoms in a teenage girl. This is not a common possession, he noted in his diary. There is something older, something that doesn't just want to inhabit it. It wants to exhibit itself. The team concluded that it could not be delayed any longer. The demonstration was underway, and if action was not taken soon, they were in danger of losing Mary completely. The exorcism had to be performed as soon as possible. However, the rules of the Roman ritual require explicit authorization from the bishop. While the permit was being processed, the evil continued to grow within her. This chapter is not only the prelude to the rite, but a warning to those who believe that possession is an instantaneous state, like lighting a lamp. The devil does not enter by force, he waits, persuades, pollutes. And when he's taken control, he doesn't need to say so. His very presence cries out in every corner of the place he lives. Chapter 3, The Ancient Rite. Exorcisms te, omnis immundus spiritus. With these words begin one of the most feared and at the same time most misunderstood rituals of the Christian world. Exorcism, far from being a theatrical ceremony, is an ancient combat whose structure, language, and rules have not changed in centuries. And in the case of María Del Valle, it wouldn't be any different. Permission to perform the ritual arrived on March 3, 2004. The diocesan bishop, after consultation with the Episcopal Council, approved the execution of the Rituale Romanum, the traditional Latin version of the major exorcism. This marked a point of no return. If the rite failed, Mary's soul would probably be damaged, or lost, forever. The preparation. Father Montenegro imposed strict conditions. The room had to be clean, without mirrors, without modern religious images. Only an ancient crucifix, a consecrated candle, a reliquary with a splinter of the true cross, and a silver vessel with holy water would be allowed. The family had to be absent. Only 3 people would enter the room: the priest, his assistant, and a doctor appointed by the diocese. Before starting, the father fasted for 3 days. This step, although not obligatory in the new rituals, is part of a tradition that veteran exorcists consider essential. Fasting is not only physical, it involves silence, isolation, and deep prayer. It is believed that the exorcist's soul must be in a state of extreme purity to avoid being contaminated during the confrontation. The beginning of the ritual. At 2:45 p.m. on March 5, the room was sealed. Mary was tied to a chair reinforced with leather straps, not for punishment, but for protection. During states of deep possession, people may seriously injure themselves or attack others with unusual violence. The ritual began with the Litany of Saints, an ancient plea that calls for the intercession of martyrs, virgins, and saints of early Christianity. Maria remained silent for the first 5 minutes. But when the priest pronounced the name of Street Agatha, her body bowed strongly. From his throat sprang a dry, masculine laugh. "She cannot hear you, priest," said the voice, hoarse and out of any human tone. "He has no tongue to pray." This statement was disturbing. Saint Agueda, according to tradition, was martyred for refusing to renounce her faith. Her breasts were cut and her tongue was torn. It was no accident. It was a direct mockery of invocation. The language of ritual. From that time on, the priest used only Latin. The Church considers that the use of Latin confers spiritual authority because of its connection with the original texts, far removed from modern contaminations. Mary began to react violently to every word of the Exorcismus and Satanum et Angelos Apostaticos. He shouted in alternate languages, talked about the priest's personal secrets, mentioned his deceased mother, details impossible to know by any other means. The doctor who was present confirmed that his voice not only changed in tone, but also in frequency. At certain times, his vocal cords vibrated outside the standard human range. In addition, his heart rate was maintained at 45 beats per minute, somewhat abnormal during a state of extreme agitation. The confrontation. During the second hour of the ritual, the phenomenon occurred that would change the course of everything. When Father Montenegro pronounced the passage, Imperit tibi Deus Pater, imperit tibi Deus Filius, Mary leaned forward, broke one of the leather straps and spit blood over the reliquary. The assistant, terrified, almost left the room. The priest stood firm. He took out a small jar of blessed oil and drew a cross on the child's forehead. The result was immediate. Her skin began to bubble as if burned with acid. "What's your name?" Montenegro asked, repeating the traditional formula 3 times. After a few seconds, an answer popped up between his teeth. "I don't have one. We are Legion." The reference was not accidental. Legion is the name used in Mark's Gospel when Jesus is faced with a collective possession. It meant that what dwelt in Mary was not one demon, but several. This complicated everything. Exorcism against an entity can last for hours, against several, days or even weeks. The obligatory pause. For health and ritual reasons, major exorcisms cannot be prolonged indefinitely. After 4 hours, the body of the possessed can collapse. At 7:10 p.m., the ritual was stopped. The priest sprinkled holy water on Mary and covered her with a white sheet. "I would sleep until dawn." At least they hoped so. But that night, in the house, no one slept. Steps could be heard on the roof. The neighborhood dogs began to howl at the same time. And Mary, from her bed, whispered without moving. A phrase repeated in an unknown language, rhythmic and slow. The theologian who accompanied the team recorded it. By playing it in slow motion the next day, they discovered its meaning. It was an Assyrian funeral chant. He invoked Pazuzu, a demon of plague and destruction. Chapter 4, The Silent Infestation. The devil rarely comes in with a bang. It comes like mold, it adheres, expands and destroys from within. Diary of Father Esteban Montenegro. Before María Del Valle uttered words in dead tongues, before her body convulsed at the touch of the holy water or the light bulbs burst in her shadow, there were signs. Insidious, discreet, and therefore more dangerous. This chapter focuses on one of the least understood phases of the possession process, infestation. What is infestation? In Catholic demonology, and particularly in the Vatican's classified documents on exorcism cases, infestation is distinguished from possession. Infestation is the progressive entry of the disease into a place, object, or environment. It does not imply that the person is still dominated by an entity, but that the devil has begun to prepare the ground. It is like humidity before the flood. During the investigation of the case, Father Montenegro and his team reconstructed a chronology of events prior to Mary's spiritual collapse. Most of them might seem, to the secular eye, mere coincidences or domestic problems. But when analyzed together, under the theological and ritual magnifying glass, they make up a pattern recognized by exorcists all over the world. Changes in the environment. The first hint was olfactory. 3 weeks before Maria was diagnosed with possession, the family began to notice a persistent stench of rotten meat in her room. They cleaned the room thoroughly, changed sheets, fumigated. The smell returned. According to the French demonologist Father Jacques Risset, the demon manifests itself first through the most primitive sense, smell. Because it is the one most tied to the survival instinct. Soon after, the electrical malfunction began. The lights flashed at 3:00 a.m., the so-called devil's minute, referring to the hour opposite Christ's death. The television went on by itself. The security cameras were turned off at night, but when reviewing the recordings, distortions remained, dark shapes that crossed the frame, shadows without origin. The clock in the quarter always marked 3:33 a.m. even when the batteries were changed. Attacks on animals. Another constant pattern in infestations is the reaction of animals. The Del Valle family had a mongrel dog, Toby, who had been sleeping at Maria's feet for years. Suddenly the animal refused to enter the room. He growled in front of the door, urinated and howled as if he saw something invisible. 2 weeks later, Toby disappeared. They found him in the garden, dead, with no visible wounds, but with his tongue out and his eyes wide open. Experts consulted by Father Montenegro's team, especially a Benedictine friar who had worked in West Africa, pointed out that demonic entities, before focusing on a human victim, alter the beings most sensitive to the spiritual, the animals. The Ouija table. The object that opened the door was a handmade Ouija board, which Maria and two friends made after watching a tutorial on the internet. According to the confession of one of them, the game began as a joke, but in one of the sessions, the planchette needle spelled the word Pazuzu and moved violently, hitting the edge until it chipped. The next day, one of the girls involved suffered from sleep paralysis with hallucinations. Another suffered an unexplained domestic accident. Only Mary appeared unharmed. At first, the researchers found the table under her bed, wrapped in a black cloth. On its reverse, someone had drawn a symbol that did not correspond to any known angelic seal or stealth. Later, Vatican experts would associate it with the symbol found in the caves of Hatra, in present-day Iraq, a Babylonian seal of protection. Use backwards. Noise and presence. During the infestation, family members began to hear footsteps, whispers and knocks on the walls. Always after 3 a.m. the cameras captured objects moving by themselves. Mary's father was beaten by an invisible force while sleeping. The mother began to dream of a hooded figure who told her, "Your daughter is no longer yours." One of the most important points in the theory of infestation is that it is not always limited to the possessed. The environment is also polluted. The entire house begins to function as a spiritual nest. And if it is not detected in time, that nest can become hell itself. Human error. The family, like many others, sought help first with doctors, then with therapists and finally with a medium who performed an energetic cleaning in the house. This made everything worse. The ritual she performed, poorly structured and without legitimate religious basis, provoked a direct manifestation. According to the records, Maria suffered a crisis in which she spoke in a male voice for 9 minutes and accurately described a hidden abortion of her aunt, who had died 10 years earlier. The medium fled the place. And the infestation then gave way to oppression. The process of infestation is like an invisible virus that infects the soul of the house before fixing on a body. Often ignored or misunderstood, it is the most critical step in the possession phenomenon. Because if it's caught early, it can stop. But when underestimated, what follows is the purest darkness. Chapter 5, The Tongues of Hell. The devil does not only enter the body. It gets into language. It contaminates the word, reverses it, twists it beyond recognition. Mons. Corrado Balducci, theologian and exorcist of the Vatican. Among the signs that the Catholic Church has defined as unequivocal manifestations of demonic possession, there is one that defies any medical or psychological explanation: the ability to speak unknown languages without having learned them, a phenomenon called xenoglossa. In the case of Maria Del Valle, this phenomenon not only manifested itself. It became the axis of the manifestation. The first demonstration. The first time Mary spoke in a language she did not know was during the early morning hours when her mother found her sitting on the floor of her room, frantically writing on the walls with her own blood. When she was arrested, she stammered out a series of words which, in principle, did not make sense. A local priest, with no experience in exorcisms, was summoned to the emergency room. He recorded the scene with his cell phone and sent the audio to the archbishopric. The recording was examined by a professor of Semitic philology at the Pontifical University of Salamanca. Her opinion was clear: Mary was pronouncing fragments of an Akkadian litany, a dialect of the Assyrian-Babylonian Empire that disappeared more than 2,500 years ago. The phrases uttered were inverted supplications, distorted versions of prayers addressed to the god Marduk, but turned into blasphemies. One in particular was insistently repeated. I shu tu ananoi ilu I tu. From the depths, I give back what was snatched from me. According to the scholar, the grammatical construction was archaic, but valid. Changes in vocal structure. The specialists noticed that, during these vocalizations, Mary's voice changed drastically. His tone dropped by more than 2 octaves, which, according to phoniatricians and physicians, is not physiologically possible without mechanical distortion. A spectral analysis of his voice was performed during a recorded session. The result was disconcerting. The recording contained multiple simultaneous frequencies, as if 3 or more voices were speaking at once from the same throat. This phenomenon, known as infernal glossolalia, has no scientific explanation and has been documented in at least 30 approved exorcism cases worldwide. Dead and non-human tongues. During the second ritual of exorcism, Mary began to recite fragments of the Book of Enoch in Hebrew Paleo-Canaanite. Not only did he pronounce accurately, but he imitated the accents that only scholars of the language could identify. This language is not only arcane, but requires years of study to master it minimally. Mary was 15 years old and had never left the country or had any contact with theologians or linguists. Even more disturbing was what happened in an observation session. During a trance, the teenager began to speak in a language that does not belong to any known human linguistic system. It was a mixture of guttural consonants, clicks, whistles, and rhythmically repeated rhythms. It was initially thought to be glossolalia, speech without linguistic meaning, but a computational linguist at the University of Fribourg found repetitive syntactic structures. This indicated that it was not just babbling, it was a structured, possibly non-human language. Coded blasphemies. A detail that exorcists consider crucial: the devil rarely uses language directly. He usually perverts it, using it as a weapon. Mary came to recite the Our Father backwards, from memory, without errors. On another occasion, he improvised what seemed like a prayer, but when it was transcribed, it was a satanic hymn composed to the same rhythm as the Psalms of David. Father Montenegro wrote in his diary, "Possession is not in the voice, but in the word. The devil transforms the word, for he knows that in the beginning was the word, and to destroy it is his most symbolic act of rebellion." Reactions to sacred language. During the recitation of the Latin Creed, Mary's reaction was immediate. She began to bleed from her gums. Whenever the Latin name of Jesus Christ, Jesus Christus, was mentioned, his body trembled. But when the same name was said in Spanish or English, the reaction was less. This reinforced a common theory among exorcists: the devil more recognizes and hates the original language of the rite. Episodes of linguistic interference were also recorded. During one of the exorcisms, when the priest made a mistake in a Latin word, changing Deus to Dominus, the demonic voice corrected the mistake, mocking, "You do not know what you are saying, priest? They don't understand you even in your heaven." This level of theological, linguistic, and ritual knowledge was impossible for a teenager without training in any of these fields. And yet, he mastered it fluently. The tongues of hell are not just strange words. They are corrupted structures of the divine language. They are the voice of that which preceded man, which fell with knowledge and preserves that knowledge as poison. And in every word spoken by Mary, there was hidden not only a threat, but an ancient history of rebellion, pain, and revenge. Chapter 6: The Sacrifice of the Flesh. The body becomes an altar and a battlefield. The skin burns, the nails fall off, the bones creak, but the devil remains. For his hunger is not of pain. It is of dominion. Father Gabriel Amorth, chief exorcist of Rome. When a demon takes control of a person, it does not just seek the soul. Look for the flesh. Matter that was molded by God in his image and likeness is the vessel most hated by fallen spirits. Because the body with all its frailties was dignified by the incarnation of Christ. Therefore, demons do not just inhabit it, they defile it. In the case of María Del Valle, the physical damage documented during the possession process exceeded the typical records of seizures, self-mutilation, and anger attacks. His body was literally transformed into a field of evil experimentation. Inverted stigmas. One of the first physical manifestations documented on Mary were spontaneous wounds in specific areas of the body. The first appeared on his wrists and feet, oval, symmetrical marks, like open wounds that did not heal. However, unlike the stigmata recognized by the Church, such as those of St. Pius of Pietrelcina, these wounds emanated a smell of sulfur, and not of flowers or fresh blood. Dr. Luis Castañera, a medical examiner who was part of the observation team, testified under oath that the wounds did not correspond to any pattern of self-injury or known dermatological disease. Despite the application of antibiotics and ointments, the sores returned every night, in exactly the same place, as if they were reprinted. The Church called this phenomenon counter-stigmatization, a satanic mockery of the wounds of Christ, imposed not as a symbol of redemption, but of corruption. Compulsive self-destruction. During the most critical phase of the process, Maria began to suffer episodes of violent self-mutilation, even under sedation. He scratched off fragments of skin. Tufts of hair with intact roots were pulled out. He bit his lips and fingertips until he left the bone exposed. The most shocking occurred on March 18, 2004, when she was found in her room with symbols engraved on her abdomen. They were not deep cuts, but were perfectly symmetrical and formed a pattern, a demonic stealth associated with the Astaroth spirit. The problem was that Mary had no access to knives, no knowledge of demonic symbolism. The marks seemed to have been made with heat, like a cattle marking iron. And yet there were no traces of burns around him. Disproportionate force. Father Montenegro's testimony includes several episodes where Maria demonstrated a physical strength that was impossible for her frame. On one occasion, he pushed a solid oak table, more than 70 kilos, several meters, without prior impulse. In another, during an attempt at restraint, he freed himself from surgical shackles, dislocating both shoulders without a cry of pain. According to medical records, his muscle mass did not justify such strength. And yet he did. What exorcists consider here is not that the devil acts as an enhancer, but that he suppresses the natural limits of the human body, because it is no longer the body that acts, but the entity through it. Physical rejection of the sacred. Every time a relic approached, Mary went into a state of spasm. The most violent occurred during a visit by Father Ernesto Gaitan, who was carrying a bone fragment of Saint Catherine of Siena. When he placed the relic on Mary's breast, her skin began to form blisters on contact, as if it were burned. The skin turned red in the shape of an inverted cross, and his eyes, black at the time, bled from the corners. This type of reaction has been documented in other cases, but the striking thing here was that it occurred even when the relic was not visible. That is to say, Mary's body reacted without the object being in sight, as if the demon were spiritually sensing it. The doctors found no explanation for the selective photosensitivity or the generation of localized blisters. Attempts were made to replicate the phenomenon with other objects, without success. He only reacted to the truly consecrated. The devil's intention? To disfigure. The devil seeks to disfigure what God created. Not only to hurt the body, but to deform it, to destroy it, to turn it into a grotesque reflection of its original glory. Maria suffered a progressive atrophy of certain muscles of her face, her smile disappeared. His eyes sank. In recent weeks, her facial expression no longer looked like that of a teenager. He had a mask of hate, with jaw stiffness and a murderous look. His voice was permanent, low, metallic. It moved rigidly, as if its skeleton did not respond at will. The body, the temple that was to be sacred, had become an infested carcass. The sacrifice of the flesh was not only painful, it was symbolically crucial. Because if the body broke, the soul was still at risk. The exorcist understood it well. As long as the body resisted, there was hope. Because if the devil could also destroy the receptacle, then there would be no more soul to be released. There would only be an empty shell, a living statue possessed by something that never wanted to be human. Chapter 7, The Fast of the Fallen Angels. Where the devil enters, life flees. Food, water, air. Nothing feeds a body when the soul has been occupied. Mons. André François, exorcist of the Diocese of Lyon. One of the recurring signs in the most extreme cases of demonic possession is absolute rejection of food. Not by human will, nor by sickness of the body, but by spiritual aversion. The demon that inhabits a body does not need food, and often rejects it as a symbol of what it cannot have, life. In the case of María del Valle, the rejection of food was progressive, but implacable. Over the course of 53 days, his body was transformed into something that breathed, but did not live. Involuntary renunciation. The first signs of what doctors called spiritual dissociation-induced anorexia began mildly. Mary rejected common foods, claiming that they tasted like wet soil or rotten meat, even when offered fresh fruit or water. At first, they thought it was a nervous reaction. But soon the phenomenon became systematic. Everything that entered his mouth was vomited or spit violently, accompanied by growls or phrases in unknown languages. In one of the first clinical reports, it is detailed how, while trying to give her a small unconsecrated host, Mary felt immediate suffocation and vomited blood. The host had not yet touched his tongue, it was enough to approach her. Over time, even the smell of food provoked violent reactions, such as convulsions or verbal profanations. On one occasion, during an intravenous feeding attempt, his body went into a state of catatonic paralysis for 17 minutes. When he came to himself, he murmured in Latin, "Bread is for the living. I am not of his people." The body on strike. In 2 weeks, Maria lost more than 9 kilos. Her skin began to show signs of extreme dehydration, cracks, broken nails, hair loss. But what was more worrying was that his vital signs remained stable, against all medical logic. The clinical nutrition team at San Rafael Hospital warned that an organism in that state should have collapsed. There was not enough circulating glucose to keep her conscious. There were no active muscle or lipid reserves. And yet she kept talking, walking, shouting, as if an alien force was holding her from within. This spiritual feeding was not metaphorical. Exorcists believe that the devil is nourished by suffering, fear, blasphemy, and therefore does not require the biological elements of life. The body is sustained by him, but not to live, but to be vehicle of manifestation. Fasting as punishment. In some cases documented in the Vatican, the devil imposes fasting not as a reaction to food, but as a mechanism of spiritual torture. Certain demonic entities are known to hate the act of eating because of their association with communion, sharing, and the sacrament of the Eucharist. Therefore, they prevent the victim from feeding, as a form of punishment to the divine in her. During the most critical weeks, Mary cried at the sight of food, even as her body trembled with hunger. In a trance, he shouted, "Give me bread! Give me bread, before he wakes up again." The exorcists interpreted this as a fissure in possession. Mary's consciousness was still there, fragmented, begging for food while the devil prevented it. The simulation of the Eucharist. The most chilling point came on the 49th. Mary, in a trance, asked for bread and wine. The team believed it was a legitimate plea. Father Montenegro, in an act of hope, prepared a small unconsecrated communion, symbolizing openness to grace. Mary accepted it with feigned devotion. But as he swallowed it, he smiled, and said in a deep voice, "Now he's inside too." The symbolism of this act is terrifying, the devil imitating the most sacred sacrament, parodying communion, profaning the symbol of the body and blood of Christ to mock those present. From that moment on, he never asked for food again. No water. Nothing. Spiritual implications. Demonic fasting not only weakens the body, it isolates the soul. The prolonged hunger alters the judgment, confuses the senses, and in cases of possession, it wears away the bonds that unite the spirit with the physical world. It is a process of dissociation, where the victim loses the notion of reality and surrenders, slowly but inevitably, to the invading will. Father Montenegro wrote in his diary, "The fasting he suffers is not voluntary, but it is total. His body withers like a flower without light, and in its place, something else grows. Something that shouldn't be here." Mary stopped eating for 53 days. His body should have collapsed on the 30th. And yet his voice remained firm. His look, defiant. And his body, useful. The devil does not need healthy flesh. Only useful meat. Chapter 8, The Game of Multiple Possession. What's your name? We are many. We are legion. Gospel of Mark 5:9. A demonic possession is, by itself, a limiting experience. But when it is not a single demon, but a legion of entities invading a body, terror escalates to unthinkable levels. The control is not linear. There is no single evil consciousness. What happens is a kind of hellish turn, where demons compete, take turns, confront, and sometimes cooperate for a common goal, the total destruction of the soul. In the case of María Del Valle, signs of multiple possession began to appear after the 30th. Until then, all symptoms and phenomena seemed to have a single source, a voice, a pattern of behavior, a set of manifestations. But then, the voices changed. Impossible vocal changes. During an exorcism session held on April 4, 2004, Father Montenegro recorded the most alarming change to that point. In the midst of the prayers, Mary's voice, already grave and distorted, changed its tone 3 times in less than 5 minutes. The first voice was guttural and mocking. The second, feminine, dry and melodious, with a French accent. The third, childish, shrill, and deeply offensive. The most disturbing thing was that the three voices seemed to speak to each other. Not to those present. Between them. As if the body were now a demonic discussion room. The audio was sent to experts in vocal analysis. The result was categorical. There were 3 different phonological patterns, not attributable to a single person. Different glottic placement, different respiratory modulations, and in one case, a vocal frequency impossible to achieve without extreme training or digital manipulation. But there were no microphones, no loudspeakers. Just the body of a teenage girl in the room. Simultaneous glossolalia and xenoglossa. Multiple possession also manifested itself in the phenomenon of glossolalia, speaking in meaningless tongues, and xenoglossa, speaking real languages unknown to the subject. In the same session, Maria was recorded speaking at ecclesiastical Latin, without grammatical errors. Aramaic, known to only a few linguists. Old German, High German. In the form of Nahuatl ritual, used in pre-Columbian sacrifices. The most striking thing was not that he spoke these languages, but that he interspersed them in complex phrases, as if different voices disputed attention and linguistic control. At one specific moment, he said a prayer in 3 different languages. In one breath. Differentiated identities. During the sessions, exorcists tried to identify the entities. Using the ancient Roman ritual, they asked directly, "Who is here?" What followed was one of the most disturbing transcripts of the process. "I am Belial. And I am your tongue. And I her knife. And I hunger that does not sleep." 4 sentences. 4 voices. 4 identities. No equal. Father Montenegro interpreted this moment as a clear statement of multiple possession. But most alarming was the implicit hierarchy. There was a primary demon, a leader, and others who fulfilled specific functions within the body. Like soldiers under one banner. Fracture of the will. One of the most dangerous consequences of this type of possession is the fracturing of the victim's eye. In simple possessions, the person can fight, resist, hide within his mind. But in multiple possessions, that resistance is crushed by the multiplicity of the siege. Maria began to have episodes of complete amnesia, where she did not remember whole days. At other times, he would write letters to his mother that seemed to have been written by a 5-year-old girl. Then, hours later, he wrote in Latin in perfect medieval calligraphy. When the writings were shown to him, he did not recognize them as his own. He even signed with different names: Clara, Gal, Agnes, Samael. This suggested that the dissociation was not only spiritual, but psychological. The soul of Mary was being displaced from its center, forced to divide, to hide from the inner voices. Theology of multiple hosting. Christian demonology considers that demons do not cooperate easily. They are, by essence, beings of hatred and betrayal. But in certain contexts, such as satanic cults, failed rituals, or cursed inheritances, they can enter the same body if the spiritual realm is sufficiently defiled. In Mary's case, a generational family curse was suspected, along with the use of an Ouija board ritualized with Sumerian symbols, which is mentioned in a later appendix. This would have opened several doors to different entities, which entered successively or simultaneously. Father Montenegro wrote, "We are no longer fighting a demon. We are fighting a cabal, a small assembly from hell. Everyone has a role. Each waits his turn. And everyone wants to stay." Physical consequences of multiple possession. Maria's body began to show signs of neurological collapse, tics, spasmodic movements in unconnected areas, localized temperature changes in different limbs. In a single minute, his right arm could be at 39 degrees C, while his left arm dropped to 29 degrees C. His heart rate went up and down without a pattern, and brain scans showed unusual activity in both hemispheres at the same time, in areas incompatible with normal functions. This could not be explained by known neurology. The final terror. Multiple possession does not end when one of the demons leaves, because exorcism must name and expel each one. One by one. How to deparasitize a mind fragmented by the invisible. Some hide. Others pretend to have been exorcised. Some sleep. And if you stay, everything can start again. Father Montenegro knew it well. And so he wrote in his diary. "We must find the last one. Because if one stays, they will all come back." Chapter 9, The Language of the Abyss. Not every tongue was made to be spoken. Some were created to open doors that should never have existed. Archive of the Exorcist of the Diocese of Toledo, 17th century. One of the most puzzling phenomena within demonic possession is the use of unknown or extinct languages, combined with incomprehensible signs, phrases, and automatic scripts. This phenomenon has been recorded over the centuries by exorcists, theologians, and linguists. Some call it infernal glossolalia. Others, the language of the abyss. In the case of María Del Valle, this language was not just part of the demonic spectacle. It was a weapon. A form of internal communication between the entities that inhabited it, and also a way to invoke, seal, or challenge those who tried to help it. The first unknown word. During the third exorcism session, Mary shouted a word she had never heard before. Call Themoric. Father Montenegro stopped the session. It was not a recognized language, but there was something in the pronunciation, in the rhythm of the word, that disturbed him. It was repeated many times over the weeks. In trance states, in agony cries, or in night whispers. Sometimes spoken by a voice. Sometimes for several. It was a Jesuit linguist, Brother Paolo Martinelli, who proposed the hypothesis that the word contained Sumerian phonetic roots mixed with Canaanite consonant structures. A compound language. A kind of infernal hybrid language, possibly fabricated for rituals. Automatic writing and symbols. One of the most documented moments in Maria's case was when, during a silent trance, she began to write without looking at the paper. He used his own blood mixed with saliva. What emerged were geometric symbols and combinations of inverted letters. The intervention of experts in religious cryptography was requested. The manuscript was subjected to pattern analysis and compared with apocryphal texts from the Dead Sea, Templar codices, and encrypted scripts from the Grimoire Liber Juratus Honorii. The most relevant findings were the repetition of Gamaliel's stealth, a demon linked to corrupt dreams and mental confusion. Variations of the seal of Abezathabu, an Egyptian demon mentioned in Solomon's Testament. And most alarming, a symbol identical to that found in the ruins of the crypt of Arbanin, Albania, where according to 14th century records, it had been confined to a hostile spirit sealed by a dead tongue. Words with physical effects. Throughout the process, it was discovered that certain words spoken by Mary caused tangible physical effects. As Smet Ra, pronounced 3 times, it always preceded an electrical collapse in the room. This occurred in 3 separate sessions, with independent technical equipment. Zoan El, this word was recorded while the digital thermometer marked a sudden drop of 7 degrees Celsius in 90 seconds inside the room. Vector Rame, said in a low voice, it caused nosebleeds in the nearest present. This was documented on video and witnessed by doctors. Apparently, these words had an active ritual function, not just symbolic. As if they were commands, activators, keys. The echo of the lost language. During a particularly critical session, Mary began to recite a canticle with precise metrics, similar to a litany. The recording was sent to the Pontifical University of Salamanca, where a team of theologians with linguistic training identified at least 12 words as derivations from Proto-Akkadian, a language dead for more than 4,000 years. However, the rhythmic structure was closer to the Sumerian incantations of invocation to Era, god of plague and war. Most chilling was the tentative interpretation of the canticle, line by line. Come, shadow without a face. Touch the water with your flame. Let the echo well be opened. And let the old things be loosed. This poem, if you can call it that, very much resembles a call, an invocation to unleash an ancestral being or force. It was not a delusion. It was a structured, rhythmic, ritual language. Conclusion, is demonic language a human invention? Skeptics will say that this may be the result of cryptomnesia, the memory of things read or heard in the past without consciously remembering it, combined with a mind altered by trauma or religious suggestion. However, when we compare the records of historical cases, such as that of Anneliese Michel, Germany, 1975, or Robbie Monheim, the case that inspired The Exorcist, we see similar patterns. Words repeated between unrelated cases. Writing of symbols that only appear in rare grimoria. Extinct languages with no possibility of learning by the possessed. Could there then be a language of hell? Not necessarily as a language with grammar and human lexicon, but as a non-human, symbolic and vibrational mode of expression, which seeks into consciousness through doors opened by ritual, curse or sin. Father Montenegro summed it up as follows. The devil need not speak. But when it does, it's not to communicate. It is to corrupt. Every word he says tries to nest in the listening soul. Chapter 10, The Last Battle. At that time, it was not a body that was screaming. It was the abyss. Diary of Father Montenegro, April 23, 2004. On April 23, 2004, at 3:13 a.m., the final session of the Exorcism of María Del Valle began. It was made in the monastery of San Gregorio, an old enclosure of the 16th century, isolated in the mountains of the north of Córdoba, Argentina. The place had been previously exorcised and prepared for 3 days with fasting, uninterrupted prayer, and the display of relics authorized by the bishopric. The following were present. Father Montenegro, Principal Exorcist. Father José María Alcorta, Spiritual Assistant and Ecclesiastical Witness. Sister Elvira, Contemplative Nun in charge of medical surveillance. 2 doctors, one of them a psychiatrist, present by order of the Archbishopric. An ecclesiastical notary, charged with documenting the facts for the Holy See. Maria arrived in a state of profound deterioration. He weighed 39 kilos. Her skin showed spontaneous lacerations. He spoke very little, but at times his voice was clearly that of other entities. The day before, he had written with his fingernails on the walls of his room, "Today they will not win. He will come for you also." The beginning of the ritual. The exorcism began at 3:13 a.m., the time traditionally associated with the reversal of the time of Christ's crucifixion, 3 p.m., and considered by many demonologists to be the ungodly hour. Father Montenegro used the Rituale Romanum of 1614, approved version for cases of extreme demonic infestation. Relics of Saint Teresa of Avila and a fragment of the True Cross were placed near the body of Mary. For the first 20 minutes, there was silence. Mary seemed absent, in a trance. His breathing was irregular. But when Father Montenegro pronounced for the 3rd time the Adjuro te, Satan, I swear, Satan, the entire room vibrated. A gust of unexplainable wind shook the closed curtains. The temperature, which was 18 degrees C, dropped in a matter of seconds to 11 degrees C. Medical sensors recorded intermittent tachycardias in Maria, which then stabilized abruptly, as if something had taken control of the heart. The total manifestation. At 3:46 a.m., Mary suddenly opened her eyes. His pupils were completely dilated, without reflex. His voice changed and he began to repeat words in Aramaic. Father Alcorta, who knows the language, identified a constant phrase. Annihilate, see it atem. I walk, and you don't? Suddenly, his body was pushed backwards. The leather straps that held her arms were tightened to break the stainless steel clasp. The intervention of the 2 doctors was necessary to prevent her from falling off the stretcher. At that time, Maria uttered, with chilling clarity, a phrase that had not been recorded in previous sessions. We are no longer 5. We are 9. And one of you belongs to us. The atmosphere became tense. Father Montenegro did not stop. He ordered in Latin. Per Christum Dominum Nostrum, exi nunc. Non ultra manibis. By our Lord Jesus Christ, come out of it. You will stay no longer. Mary screamed so loudly that the emergency lights went out. A lamp exploded. The doctor in charge suffered a shock from contact with the wire disconnected from the instrument. The breaking point. At 4:07, the temperature fell again. Maria began levitating about 20 centimeters above the mattress, while her limbs writhed in non-human positions. Doctors confirmed that their vertebrae flexed beyond the anatomical threshold without causing permanent injury. It was at that moment that Mary spoke in a low, slow, masculine voice. He said, I am the hunger that devours the eternal. I was invoked. She offered us her pain. And you, your defeat. Father Montenegro took the relic from the True Cross and pressed it against the young woman's chest. A deafening cry shook the walls of the monastery. The painting on the frames cracked. Sister Elvira began to bleed from her nose. All the clocks in the room stopped at 4:13. Then the unexpected happened. Mary spoke in her own voice. Help me. They are burning my thoughts. It was a faint whisper. A crack. A moment where she was still there, conscious. The exorcist called her by name, and she nodded. At that time, Montenegro began the litany of saints, asking for the intercession of Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Saint Benedict. The closing of the abyss. For the next 17 minutes, the demonic voices took turns to insult, spit, and utter incomprehensible phrases. But at 4:31 a.m., after the final sentence, In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Mary screamed and lost consciousness. His body fell as if it had been freed from unbearable internal tension. The pulse rate dropped to 64. The pressure stabilized. The temperature returned to 18 degrees C. The exorcism was over. After the storm, Mary slept for 5 days in a row. When he woke up, he could not remember what had happened. She was lucid, but with signs of severe post-traumatic stress. She was taken to a convent for recovery and psychological observation. He never had symptoms of possession again. Father Montenegro, however, died 6 months later of a fulminant cerebral aneurysm. In his diary he wrote, "It wasn't a case. It was a war. And even though we won, something remained open. Not everything came out." The case was closed by the Diocese of Córdoba in December 2004. But it is still studied as one of the few exorcisms with confirmed multiple possession and paranormal phenomena measured by medical instruments.